The inquiry arc is represented in the C3 framework is not limited to any one particular type of approach. Inquiry learning uses a variety of approaches. Most commonly are project-based learning and problem-based learning. Both project-based learning and problem-based learning are instructional models that give teachers a research-based method in order to develop instruction and design lessons. Both methods provide a systematic way of facilitating the learning process by outlining the logical steps to guide the teacher and the student in how to set up the instruction. And both are based on the outcomes, what you want to see students achieve. So you're doing it with the end in mind. Note that these approaches are within the inquiry model and they overlap one another. A lot of times it's not an either or type of scenario in which there's a lot of shared components in problem-based learning. So they overlap a great deal, share many common features, and they're often always going to result in some sort of a product, whether the product be written or an actual project type of results. But both require critical thinking, research, questioning, reflection, and there are different types of strategy. There's differences lie mostly in the strategies in order to get to the end results. Problem-based learning is an instructional approach that knowledge and skills to develop a viable solution to a defined problem. Critical to the success of this approach is the selection of interdisciplinary problems and the facilitator or teacher who's there to guide them through the learning process and conduct a thorough debriefing at the conclusion as a means of reflection in the process. Twerk and Sage in 2002 described problem-based learning as an experimental learning that's organized around investigation and resolution of messy real-world problems. They describe students as engaged problem solvers, seeking to identify the root problem and the conditions needed and what would be the best solution for that. Through this type of research and experiment, students then begin to self-direct their learning. This also can be seen in time-based learning, which is similar to problem-based learning, in that the learning is organized around achieving a shared goal or a project that's already been identified. And within that project, there's various approaches that can be used that students are pretty much using a list of criteria or a rubric so that they are very clear on the product that they're hoping to reach together. Engagement, self-direction, collaboration, application, new knowledge, and reflection are all components in problem-based learning and project-based learning, and both methods facilitate inquiry-based learning. And now at this time, I'm going to turn it back to Steve.
All right, thanks, Ann. Appreciate it. And if you are interested in a pretty good short, simple overview, scholarly overview of problem versus project-based learning and the inquiry model in general, the article we've referenced at the bottom of this slide, which of course you'll have access to this slide at the end of the presentation, overview of problem-based learning, definitions and distinctions in the Interdisciplinary Journal of Problem-Based Learning. Does a pretty good job of that. It's short, it's sweet, and it gives some pretty good examples. So I encourage you to definitely check that out. But what we're going to do now is we're going to watch a video, which hopefully the internet gods will allow to work properly. And this is a video from the Buck Institute, which really focuses quite a bit on PBL. Now we've got a couple places. We're going to stream the video for you here on our end, but occasionally we have issues with the sound. So if the video does not work properly for you, let me show you where you can find it so you can watch it independently. If you go to our wiki, on the webinar series link, which you can see is right here, if you look in the navigation bar, wiki's link is right here, and it is this video right here, Buck Institute, What is PBL? And if you just click on it, and it should boot up for you. There it goes. All right. So I'm going to give you a second, make sure you can access it or find it at least before I start playing the video on our end. As we watch the video, like you to just jot down 2 or 3 things that you see in the video that you would identify as key features of an inquiry model. What do you see going on or being discussed in this video that really ties into what we've talked about so far? And we're going to ask you to share out after the video. And it's not that long. It's about 3 minutes and 49 seconds exactly. I know this because I see a number right in front of me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and play the video now and move on from there. All right. Can't hear it. It was boring. You sat in class, memorized as much as you could, and tried to pass a test at the end. But is that good enough? These days, school can be more interesting and effective by focusing students on work that matters. This is project-based learning explained. Most adults live in a world of projects. Whether it's a job assignment, home improvement, or planning a wedding, we need to actively solve problems. But unfortunately, schoolwork looks more like this than this. Let's take a look at this project-based world. Meet Claire. She was recently presented with a challenge. Her company, Super Suds, makes soap, and it was up to her to find the most earth-friendly way to produce it in the future. Her boss gave her a budget and a few requirements, and it was up to her to come up with a solution. She organized and managed a team who researched the options and created materials summarizing the issues. Claire's team asked for feedback and presented their findings to the boss. Claire came out of the project looking like a rock star, and she learned a lot about green products. If you look closely, Claire's success involved critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, things that aren't often taught in traditional classrooms. The world needs more Claires, so how do we get them? The answer is project-based learning, or PBL. By focusing students on a project, teachers put them on a path that deepens their knowledge and builds skills they'll need in the future. Here's what I mean. Mr. Simmons has always been a good science teacher, and his students do well on Friday's tests. Unfortunately, what they learned was gone by Saturday morning. That wasn't good enough for him. Soon he learned about project-based learning and decided to give it a shot. Mr. Simmons got the idea for his first project on microorganisms when nearly half of his students were suddenly absent with the flu. He asked his students why they thought so many of their classmates got sick at the same time. That lively discussion produced a lot of good questions and a list of things the kids wanted to know. Mr. Simmons then announced their project was to help elementary school kids understand, how can we not get sick? After dividing the class into teams, he got them started on the project. It was up to the students to ask questions, research, collaborate, give each other feedback, and figure out the best ways to make their points clear to children. One team chose to make an educational video on the connection between hand washing and avoiding the flu. Another chose to create posters to show how viruses spread. The project team showed off their final work to an enthusiastic audience of parents and their children at a nearby elementary school. Sitting in the front row was our good friend and local rock star Claire, who saw a bit of herself in the students. It was clear that the project was a success for the students, the audience, and Mr. Simmons. His students practiced critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. The project wasn't about memorization, but learning in depth about viruses and how to prevent spreading disease, a lesson they will never forget. At the end of the presentation, Claire introduced herself to the students and told them that they were rock stars and that the world needs more people who can think like them. To learn more about project-based learning, go to BIE.org. All right. So hopefully you heard that video pretty well. And I didn't break my headphones. I was trying to do the sound. Just take a minute, process, and think about some elements that you saw discussed in there that really tie into what we talked about so far. What makes those projects, for the project that was explored in there, for example, what makes that inquiry as we've discussed it so far? Just respond in the question or comment box. and Ann will share out some of those responses.
Oh, I do. Kathleen said research-based.
Got any more, folks? Come on, throw them at us. All right.
Collaboration. Joyce says collaboration of students taking responsibility of their own learning, and communication of information learned. Ginny says allowing students to find their own conclusions and findings. The students are active learners, not passively sitting there and soaking up information. Oh, Kathleen says real world application too. Kim says learner-centered, engagement at high levels, solution-oriented.
All right. There's some awesome responses. I really appreciate those responses too. Yeah, and really, you see a lot going on in there that we've touched on already. Definitely a lot of critical thinking. Collaboration, you guys touched on it already. The relevance, research, finding some sort of solution, presenting that solution in some way that's feasible for them, and exploring some sort of important question. And and that's another thing that think about too when we talk about project-based versus problem-based. A lot of people seem to get confused and think that only problem-based deals with the question. But as you see there, that's not true. Project-based also addresses a question of some kind. It's just on how you choose to approach it. And some of the research articles we have for you at the end of this presentation sort of explore some of those differences. Really, some great responses here, and really appreciate that participation. So we're going to talk now. Let me get to work again. Here we go. About some general conceptions of inquiry-based learning in the classroom. All right, there are a number of different areas we're going to look at. We're going to go over these 5 things very briefly that we see on the screen, and then we're going to talk about what inquiry would look like using an example standard from our own North Carolina Essential Standards. All right, so we're going to talk about questions, organization, resources, classroom atmosphere, presentation, and assessment. And all of these apply across any inquiry-based model that you choose to use. All right? Question development is one of the first things you do, and it's one of the first things you do in the Inquiry Act, in the C3 framework. All right? Really, educational researchers identify question development as the starting point for the process. Everybody can ask questions. Everybody can come up with questions. Elementary school kids, kindergartners. My daughter's a kindergartner. She comes up with questions all the time. All right? And these are real questions. And let's be honest, guys. We know that in most of our educational system, kids don't get the chance to often ask real questions in school. Inquiry allows students to ask those real questions. All right? But remember, though, that students really need the opportunity to practice writing questions. All right, that require more than simply factual answers. Really love this reference here from Tower. If I can go to one source, one book, and find the answer, I'm thinking too small. All right, my question is not deep enough. It's not strong enough. And so we really need to work with our kids on crafting effective, strong questions. All right, and authentic questions as well. Now, one thing to consider is that this practice of writing questions is something that can be integrated into almost any unit that you're working on and should be ongoing. It's not necessary to have a distinct practice time for questions in an inquiry model, especially if students have had the opportunity to practice question building in other units. All right, you should have learning experiences that touch on question building throughout your work. Okay. Another element to think about is how you're going to organize the process. All right, teachers really need to be able to identify how they're going to organize the process. Are you going to go whole class? All right? Are you going to go for a collaborative or a team approach, as we see in our middle picture there? All right? Are you going to have individual inquiry topics, as we see in the other picture? All right? Now, the first several times students are introduced to inquiry-based learning, really probably should use a whole class approach to let students practice it in small-scale examples, sort of observe others, and sort of become prepared to go out on their own. Collaborative or team projects allow students to take part in meaningful and productive discussions, often with others holding different viewpoints. And as Levstik and Batten point out, that is so extremely important in effective social studies instruction. It's also important to recognize that verbal interactive activities promote collaboration and negotiation of meaning among the learners. Right? And look, let's be honest, we don't construct our knowledge in a vacuum. So collaboration really gets kids to think about ways in which they can look at things through different angles. And it's also important to ensure that the teacher provides an opportunity for modeling and practicing collaborative work, and that strong feedback is consistently provided. And again, this can be built into whatever units you may be working on.